folks, George here. Today we're going to talk about Immanuel Kant's work, The Fundamental Principles of the Metaphysics of Morals. This work has a profound influence in the history of Western philosophy. With that in mind, we have to really get into what are Kant's key ideas here. Well, Kant starts with one proposition. Goodwill is the only thing that is inherently good. What does he mean by this? What is inherent goodness, after all? Well, inherent goodness, according to Kant, is that thing which is good in and of itself. That is, it's not good for something else. He suggests that in the whole universe, everything else that is good is only good because it's good for something, right? We recall Aristotle, even way back when, suggested that money is only good as an instrumental value, right? The camera that I'm shooting on right now is only a good camera for something else, right? That is making this video, amongst other things, right? This video that I'm making is only good for the educational or entertainment purposes, right? But it's good for something else. Whereas goodwill, human goodwill, reasonable goodwill, as we'll see soon, goodwill is the only thing that is inherently good in and of itself. Well, we'll see that utilitarians, for example, disagree, and they say that happiness is the only thing that is good in and of itself, for which you can't ask what is it good for. But Kant suggests it is goodwill that is inherently good, the only thing that is inherently good. In fact, goodwill is so good, being the only thing that's good, goodwill is good even if its will is not realized. That's interesting. That's interesting. Even if the will is not accomplished, the goodwill, it is still good. Yes? So, quick example would be if I tried to do something good. I tried to help somebody across the street. And then let's say that person whom I helped across the street got hit by a car. Kant would still seem to say that that is good. The goodwill that I had. How can he justify this, right? This certainly disagrees with the utilitarians who say it's the consequences that illustrate the goodness of something, of helping somebody across the street, after all. Well, Kant would say, hey, wait a second, consider this for a second. It's only bad luck that you had. And, by the way, the person I was helping across the street, it's only by the stupidest of luck that that person was actually injured. Is that what goodness should be measured by? Luck? After all, it was very unlucky that this person got hit by a car. Of course, Kant is going to say, bad luck or good luck isn't what makes something good. Rather, it's the goodwill inside. Goodwill shines on its own, even if it's not accomplished. To even bring this point home a little bit further, the usefulness or the fruitfulness has nothing to do with the goodness of will. So, for example, the fruitfulness, let's say, I help somebody across the street, and we make it in this scenario, right? We make it across the street, and the person doesn't even say thank you. And the person, I was, expecting perhaps, a tip or a pat on the back, or, maybe she gives me $1 or something like that. Kant is going to say the goodwill is still good even if it wasn't fruitful, even if it didn't come out with some great consequence. Even if the person whom I helped across the street suggests, oh, that was useless. I didn't need any help across the street. Again, that's just the bad luck of the situation, I would suppose, right? It is still good that I tried to help people. Isn't it? Well, Kant says so, because after all, it's only by misfortune or fortune, luck, that consequences really manifest one way or the other. And that can't be luck, can't be the source of goodness, at least according to Kant. So with that in mind, what is the goal? The goal here then for ethics is to cultivate reason so that you will develop good will and good volition. And then, of course, that will lead to a good life. But let's just bring this point really home for Kant. Happiness is not the point here. Happiness is not the point here. Happiness is not the goal of reason, right? Rather, the purpose of reason is to produce goodwill. Why do humans have reason? Why do we have reason? Kant is going to say the purpose of reason is to produce goodwill. Not necessarily happiness, but goodwill. So, with all that said, in my interpretation, how I'm trying to understand all of this, I understand it with this equation, or this series of equalities that Kant is putting together here. The first is goodwill equals goodness. Goodwill equals true goodness. But goodwill is equal, therefore, or further down the line, goodwill is equal to reason. Reason equals goodwill. Proper use of reason equals goodwill equals moral goodness, ethical goodness. We're going to add to that long string of equalities in a bit, but I think those are the first three. Number one, good equals goodwill. Good is goodwill. And goodwill is the proper use of reason. And the proper use of reason and the proper purpose of reason. So reason equals goodwill equals goodness. We'll add to that, like I said, in a little bit. Well, how do you use reason? How does reason yield goodness and goodwill? Reason yields duty, according to Kant. Thus, duty is the supreme good. Okay, let's add to that one more time. Goodness equals goodwill equals the proper use of reason equals duty. Duty is good. Duty is the supreme good. Doing things out of duty is the supreme good. Well, how do you know what your duty is then? Again, remember that equation, right? Reason equals duty. So if we use reason, we could discover our duties, what we are morally dutiful to do, what we are morally obligated to do by duty. A quick example of this is the maintenance of your own life. That is a duty. I have the duty to maintain the security of my own life. We'll talk about how that reason gets there in a little bit, but just as a heads up, that's one of them. Acts done from duty, that is what is good, right? Acts done from duty. So I see a person who needs help trying to cross the street. I use my reason and I discover I have the moral duty to help people cross the street safely. Yes, that is going to be just one example really quick. Doing that act and helping the person across the street, doing it because it is my duty. That is goodness, according to Kant. Now, this is quite interesting for Kantian philosophy. What if I help the person across the street because I expect her to give me money once we get to the other side of the street? That is, I'm doing it for the money that she will pay me. Even if she tells me, I will pay you. Yes, I will pay you if you help me cross the street. And then I say, oh, now I will help you. If that's the reason that you helped the person across the street, Kant is going to suggest that is not morally good. Rather, if you helped the person across the street because you recognize that it was your moral duty to help her across the street, then you did the morally good thing. But if you did it for some other reason, other than your duty, you're not a good person. Here's where it gets a little controversial. What if you helped the person across the street because it was your mother? I helped my mother across the street, and I love my mother. Kant is going to tell us if you're helping your mother across the street because you love your mother, that is not doing it for the right reasons. You have to do it for the right reasons. And for better or for worse, we'll explain this in a little bit. Love is not one of those right reasons, right? Or the emotions, other emotions, are not the right reasons. Doing it to get paid, that's not doing something from your duty. And that is not doing something moral. Let's give a more concrete example here, yes? Some people, some wealthy people, rich people in our society, give money to charity. Now, Kant is going to say giving money to charity is your duty. It's all of our duty to give money to charity. We'll explain the reason in a little bit. But do you see some people sometimes who give money to charity and they make sure that they get mentioned in the news for it? They get famous for giving money to charity? They do it because they want their name on the building? Kant is going to say, if you're giving to charity because of some other reason, then you are not doing a good thing. You're not doing something that's morally good. You're doing something for other reasons. So this is just to bring home the point. For Kant, the reasons, doing things for the right reasons, makes all the difference in morality and ethics. After all, to really bring this point home, Kant says that all sorts of ends can be accomplished without the use of reason, right? Let's say luck. Things that happen by luck are not morally good. Now, some philosophers, the utilitarians, would disagree with this, but Kant's going to say, listen, if money fell out of the sky by some miracle, let's say, right? Kant would say that's not a morally good thing, right? That's good for some other reason, but not morally good. If money fell out of the sky over an impoverished community, certainly that impoverished community would get money. Wouldn't that be good? Kant would say it's not morally good, because if the money just fell out of the sky, that wasn't done with goodwill. That wasn't done for the right reasons. It wasn't done by duty. And therefore, it's not a morally good thing. It might be good for other things, but it's not morally good. It's not ethically good. And that's the point that Kant is trying to bring home here. So, the duty, therefore, that comes from reason, using reason, that contributes to our goodwill, that is the only inherently good thing in all the universe, it creates moral laws. Moral laws. What are these moral laws? Kant has a special name for these things. The categorical imperative. The categorical imperative is the moral law. I am never to act otherwise than so that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. Another wording of that is, act only on that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should be a universal law. That's quite fascinating. So for Kant, morality is universal. For Kant, goodwill is universal. For Kant, reason is universal. For Kant, duty is universal. What does universal mean? Universal. For all people, all the time, in all places, and all circumstances. So, universal morality is what Kant believes in here. And how do we get this universal morality? Via the use of reason. Reason will teach us universal morality. The duties can only be duties if they are universal duties. So, let's talk about something for a quick second. Very frequently, Kant's categorical imperative. Act only on that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should be a universal law. Kant's categorical imperative is very frequently compared and described as similar to the golden rule. What is the golden rule? Well, it's been put in Jesus's words, right, in the New Testament, but there's also a version of the golden rule in ancient Chinese philosophy by Confucius. One wording of this golden rule is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, is that Kant's universal categorical imperative? Do unto others as I would have them do unto me. No. No, not at all. Because who knows what I want done unto me? I might be some interesting person, let's say, who likes interesting things done unto me. Of course, I want those things done unto me, so does that mean I shall do them unto other people? Kant will say, no, that's not the universal use of reason. That's the universal use of what I want. Morality isn't about what I want, according to Kant. What I want people to do to me. Rather, morality, according to Kant, is what does reason universalize? Not what do I want people to do to me. Do you see the subtle difference there? And Kant is very clear. He does not think that my own personal desires have anything to do with morality. My own personal whims of what I want done unto me. That's not what morality is about. That's not what morality is about. Morality is about using reason, according to Kant. Reason sometimes entails things that I don't want, even things that I don't want done unto me. Maybe I'm an interesting person and I have these interesting desires that I like people walking over me or dropping hot wax on me. Hey, I want that done unto me. That means I could do it unto you? Kant would say, that's got nothing to do with it. Because what you want done unto you has nothing to do with morality. Morality is about using reason. What does reason dictate your duty is? The classic example that Kant gives to really illustrate this point is, consider telling a lie because I want some money. I ask my friend, I say, can I borrow $20? I promise you that I will pay you back next week. But in the back of my mind, I'm lying. I know that I'm lying, right? I'm not going to pay my friend back because I don't do that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to avoid him. Kant would say, now, can you universalize that using reason? Well, consider, what does that entail if such a behavior, if such a lie is universalized? It actually leads to unreasonableness. It leads to absurdity. It leads to illogic. Doesn't it? Consider this. Making a promise, making a lying promise, doesn't make rational sense. What is a lying promise? A promise that's a lie? That's completely meaningless. If you universalize that, according to Kant, you've got the word promise is meaningless. And that's what he means by reason and using reason in this way. What sorts of nonsense might it entail? If it entails nonsense, like a lying promise, which doesn't even make sense, because the very notion of promise, if you universalize lying promise, the very notion of promise doesn't even make sense anymore. It's completely unreasonable. That's why, according to Kant, it is always wrong to lie. Because if you lie, if you can universalize lying, then truth is meaningless. The words you're saying are meaningless. It leads to a logical absurdity. Now, that's different from, again, that golden rule that says, do you want to be lied to? Well, some interesting people might say, yeah, I like being lied to. I'm okay with that. Right? Kant is saying that's got nothing to do with it. What you want or don't want to do unto you. That's not the golden rule. Rather, it's the use of reason and logic here. Lying promise makes no sense. It's illogical. It's abandoning the use of reason. And that is immoral. That's why lying is, for Kant, an absolute universal wrong. Always, everywhere, for everyone, in any circumstance. Now, many people consider Kant and this universal absolutist sort of position to be very extreme. Well, okay, perhaps. And Kant will respond and say, that's morality for you. That's reason for you. Sorry. By the way, going back to the example of money that just falls out of the sky, what would Kant say about that? Is that morally good when money just magically, miraculously falls out of the sky? Kant would say, maybe it's good, but it's not morally good. Here, we're talking about morality. So in the same way, hey, maybe lying is good in some other circumstance, but it's not morally good. It's not ethically good. It's good for something else. It's good to, let's say, make people feel better. That's not morality. Morality isn't to make people feel better. Morality isn't about happiness. Morality is about doing your rational duty, according to Kant. Yeah, seems pretty hardcore, and that's why many people will disagree with Kant here. But such is morality, according to Kant. Such is the purpose of using reason. Why do we have reason at all? But to use the reason in a rational, reasonable way. Let's consider a couple of examples that aren't morally good to really bring this point home. He says imitation is not morally good. So you look at a child and, you teach a child to say please and thank you. And the child simply says please and thank you, please, thank you, please, thank you, please, thank you, out of habit, let's say. Kant is going to say that's not morally good. If a child isn't doing and saying please and thank you for the right reasons, that's not morally good. It's good for something else. So if you tell your child, hey, George, I want a cookie. And I say, what are you supposed to say? Please, George, may I please have a cookie? And then I give the cookie. Why did the child say please? Did the child say please because it was her duty to say please? Kant would suggest probably not. Right? Rather, the child said please because I told her to imitate me, because I told her to do this, because she really wanted the cookie. She doesn't really have humility or gratitude for the right reasons, according to Kant. Not because it's her duty, but because she wanted the cookie, right? So for that reason, imitation in that way that children frequently do, imitation is not moral goodness. Ideally, it will develop into moral goodness as they become mature and they actually, children learn how to use reason and understand morality. But if they're merely doing it out of imitation, that's not moral goodness, according to Kant. What's another example of something that's not morally good? Again, Kant says this, what he calls the hypothetical imperative, or acting for our own interests, right? Again, back to that child example. The child is doing it. Why? Because the child is only acting from her own interests. Because she wants the cookie. That's why she speaks politely and exhibits humility and gratitude and says please and thank you. Why? Because she wants cookies, not because she knows it's the right thing to do, not because she uses reason to realize this is my duty to say please and thank you, to exhibit gratitude and humility. So those are examples, just to bring this point home, of something that is not moral. It's good for something else. With that in mind, let's revisit this list of things that are all equal, at least under my interpretation, for Kant's notion of morality. Goodwill is good. Goodwill is good. What is goodwill? Goodwill is the use of reason. What is the use of reason? The use of reason yields duty. So duty is rational, is goodwill, is goodness. How do you know this duty? By reasoning using and manifesting maxims of the categorical imperative, right? So the categorical imperative gives us our duties. The categorical imperative we discover through the use of reasons. Categorical imperatives yield goodwill, acting by categorical imperatives, which all equals moral goodness and moral rightness. Yeah. So with all that in mind, Kant is going to take it one step further and suggest, wait a second, if reason, if goodwill, rational existence is the only thing that's good in the universe, then guess what? All people are rational ends in and of themselves. Things like this, humans, are the only things that are good in themselves and are the only things that are ends in themselves. What does that mean? That phraseology is always a little bit challenging sometimes. What does it mean to say that people are always ends in themselves? Well, what it means is never treat people merely as means to something else, because they are all autonomous, rational beings with goodwill, and that is the only goodness. So you can't use somebody else's goodwill as merely as an ends to something else. The direct quote by Kant would be, act as to treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of any other person, in every case as an end withal, as an end in itself, never as a means only. Well, that's a little bit challenging then, yes? I think the most obvious example for me to really flesh this out is slavery. Never use a person as a means only. And people who have slaves and treat others like slaves, take advantage of others, that is using a person as a means to something else. You're using a human being as a tool, so to speak. And that's why clearly for Kant, slavery is going to be wrong. Or if we really extend these philosophical ideas out, Kant would be against treating rational human beings as slaves, right? Well, wait a second though. Now, I don't have slaves in my life. I don't own slaves or treat people like slaves, but don't I treat people as a means? And don't you? By the way, I teach classes. Don't I treat my students as a means? To what? Well, to getting paid. I get paid to teach classes, right? Does that mean I'm treating students as means? And I'm treating my bosses, by the way, too, in the same way. My supervisors at work, I'm treating them as means to get paid, aren't I? Kant is going to say no. Why? Because I'm not treating them as means merely. I'm not treating them only as means, right? And that's where the differentiation comes between how we interact with people in, let's say, a professional setting versus slaves. What would it be to treat my students as means in and of themselves only? Well, I would have to enslave students to take my classes and enslave students to pay me for teaching these classes. But the fact of the matter is, Kant says we are all autonomous, rational creatures And if some people don't want to take my class, they don't have to. They can walk up and get away. My boss, whom I treat as a means to money, but I don't treat my boss as a means only. Because what can my boss do? My boss could just say, well, I don't want to work with you anymore, George. Sorry, you're fired. Or I could quit my own job. And that is why I'm not treated as a means only. Right? I am treated as a means, but not a means only. I do respect everybody's rights, that is, to choose autonomously and exercise their autonomy to choose what classes to take, to pay me or not pay me, right? Things like that. Now, again, slavery being that, I think, paradigmatic example of treating somebody as a means only. With that in mind, persons, according to Kant, and in this notion, persons have absolute worth. Rational persons have absolute worth. After all, it's these kinds of things that are the only things that are good in the whole universe, good in and of themselves. And that's why for Kant, it is never appropriate to violate this kind of thing, a human, a rational person. Persons are the only things that have goodness in and of themselves, with absolute worth. He comes up with his famous phrase, we all exist as a kingdom of ends, in a kingdom of ends. Together, we should all use reason and exist within this moral community as a systematic whole. Now, I think you could see how Kantian philosophy is utilized. Something like Kantian philosophy is utilized to talk about things like human rights and justice. It's always wrong to treat people unjustly, because if you do, you are treating them merely as a means to something else. And as absolute as Kant sounds in other contexts, some people will disagree. Well, is it appropriate to lie or not? Kant will say it's never morally good to lie. I try to give him a little bit of a way out by saying sometimes you lie because it's good for something else. It's not morally good though, but it's good for something else, Kant might say. But it's never morally good to lie. Absolutely. In the same way, it's never good, always wrong to violate somebody's autonomy and treat them merely as a means. And I think that's something that many of us can get behind. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.